So I'm sitting in a chair, so I will be a part of this next presentation. I'm very, very, very excited about this next one. If you've ever been kind of on social, especially during COVID, and you may have kind of caught yourself seeing this insane video, you're like totally just cannot stop watching it. That's the type of video that Grace does. And we're gonna have a little fireside chat, go through a couple questions about her career and how she does all these crazy things that she does, and then we'll have some questions from you guys out here. So Grace, come on up. So tell us. A little bit about you. I want to tell everybody who maybe haven't heard about you. So look at this screen, social impact. It's insane. It really is some incredible numbers. 2.6 million on TikTok, 460 on Instagram, and 13K on YouTube. And it's like 13K, it's like, oh, it's just a small amount on YouTube. But that's a lot of people. And what has the last 3 years been like?
Insane. A whirlwind. I think that I kind of almost accidentally fell into what I'm doing now. I was originally actually going to school for linguistics, and I found social media before I graduated and sort of naturally evolved into what I do now. So it's been, I didn't fully understand the potential of content creation when I first started, and it ended up being a full career for me. So yeah, it's been absolutely insane.
That's amazing. And how did you go? So tell us a little bit about your story. I know that you went from portraits to this crazy short form video, product photography. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Totally. So I really first started with still portrait photography as a creative outlet, as I think many people do. I was in school at the time, and I was feeling really dejected and unfulfilled with the academic life that I was living. And so I just started, like I first borrowed my roommate's camera, and I was taking little photos and videos with it, that I invested in a camera of my own, and I was basically just going like on Facebook, joining all these photography Facebook groups, and just saying like, hey, I just bought a camera, I want to practice taking photos, like who's down, who wants to meet up and take photos with me. But what sort of made me switch from the very heavy portrait work that I was doing into the product space and the tabletop space was actually the pandemic, which I think obviously has just shaped what so many of us did. But it was really kind of out of necessity, because at that point everything started shutting down, and it was no longer hey, let's go meet up and make something cool, because you couldn't leave your house, you couldn't meet up with anybody. And so I found myself, I had my camera and I still wanted to find some way to use it and have a creative outlet. But what could I do by myself that would not require me to work with any other people? And so that was how I landed in this world of doing tabletop product work, and I ended up loving it honestly even more than the portrait stuff. But I think the portrait stuff just was a natural gateway into the world of photography and video. And then
which brings me to my next question. Horizontal versus vertical, and coming from the photo world where it's, you use the frame that kind of comes to your mind, especially with portraits. You kind of use portrait versus landscape depending on the composition you're looking for. How did you kind of make that switch into vertical?
For me, it honestly felt very natural, because I was such a content consumer, and I think such a huge part of being a content creator is also being equally a content consumer and understanding the landscape of the different platforms and what kind of content is living there and what feels organic. So it wasn't as difficult of a transition for me as someone who was so used to seeing vertical content all the time. And I think it's so interesting now, because we see vertical kind of taking over even in places that we wouldn't expect it to. I see sometimes vertical commercials on broadcast now. So it's just another way. I know some people are purists, they hate the vertical. I just think it's another perspective, another way of looking at and composing your images, but yeah.
That's amazing. And so where do you get your inspiration from? And I know it could stem from so many different places, and a lot of it's comments sometimes. So where does it come from?
I think a big part of what inspires me is trying to find new, unique ways to portray the world around me and new perspectives. And that was sort of what first spurred my TikTok channel was I had this idea for a series, which was to make commercials for random objects that you would never ever see a commercial for. And the core of that idea was just giving a new perspective to an everyday item that you would normally overlook.
So if you see this video, a lot of what Grace does is she uses the comments to create videos, and it's a lot of, I'd buy an egg from you.
Yeah.
And she makes these incredible videos just based off of some of the comments. So it's really cool. And I find that to be so unique. And do you ever get some of like crazy comments that make no sense?
Oh, absolutely. But those are sometimes the most fun too, because I think that often I'll pitch an idea to my friends and they're like, what, this isn't funny. Like, what are you talking about? Then I make the video and it translates really well. Like there was this one that I did. It was a commercial for a single crumb, like a crumb of bread. And I told people that I was going to do this, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" But you know, it's just about how you execute it, right? So sometimes the most outlandish comments are the most fun challenges.
Yeah. And what's your process like, start to finish, from these crazy comments to the execution and the work it takes?
Yeah. The very first step for me is always music. Music plays the most important role in what I do because it really sets the tone. For the mood and the feel of the video and what I'm trying to communicate with it. So I always start with a piece of music and I just sit there and listen to that piece of music 100 times and just try to come up with a vision of like how I want this story arc to play out, because I think even though I'm making these 15-second ads, you wouldn't necessarily think they don't have a narrative, they don't have a story arc, but in many ways they do. So I sort of try to map that out. Then it's like a scramble to prop source. I'm on every website imaginable trying to find, I'm very particular, the exact prop, the exact color. I sometimes build these really elaborate sets depending on what the project is. Sometimes I'm tiling a wall, I'm building a fake shower or a fake kitchen, or so there's a lot of carpentry involved. I've picked up a lot of random skills. And then I just get really stuck into the filming process, and I can go at it for a week making one video, which is very unusual for social. You know, usually it's like
that's a long time.
Yeah.
And biggest brand you've worked with. After all this, a lot of this has been about making videos for brands. And how did you? Sorry. What's been the biggest brand you've worked with?
I mean, I've worked with a couple of I've worked with lots of amazing brands. I work with Procter & Gamble a lot, which is, huge. They have so many different brands and so many different, for verticals and different kinds of products. I work a lot with Maybelline and L'Oreal, so kind of more in the beauty space now, which is exciting. I love that world because it's very fun and colorful and exciting. So yeah, I've worked with a couple of really big clients, and it's been really fun.
Did you think that this was going to be your life 3 years ago?
No, no, not at all. I think I had no idea the potential for monetization. I always knew that, influencers exist, but I thought influencing, not that I necessarily consider myself an influencer, it's kind of a weird word, but I thought that being a social media content creator was necessarily being, like standing in front of the mirror and doing an outfit of the day, or like a get ready with me, and I never saw it as being something that you could kind of shape into whatever you want it to be. And so, yeah, I've managed to find myself in this niche that I really enjoy.
Go-to gear.
Go-to gear. Well, my camera's the A7S III, and I usually use a 50mm 1.4. I love my Edelkrone slider. That's like every video I use. The probe lens, kind of like, the holy grail of tabletop right now. And I love my little Godox Mini M1 lights, my little accent lights, yeah.
Do you find yourself kind of now gearing out, like you just don't know what to buy, you want to buy the next thing?
Honestly, I'm the kind of person who likes to keep things not simple, but I like to maximize the gear that I have, and I only buy something if I'm like, okay, this is really gonna take it to the next level. But yeah, that's like why the probe lens purchase. So that was one of those things I was like looking forward to for a long time. I'm gonna get the probe lens, I'm gonna do it. Then I bit the bullet and I'm like, wow, this actually like completely transformed what I do, so.
Hardest video you've made?
I thought about this one on the way here. I would say I made a one of my random commercial video series was for a spoon, which does not sound difficult at all until you realize that a spoon is a highly metallic, concave object that reflects literally everything in the room, and it was impossible to light. It was reflecting everything. That was just one of those lighting challenges that really pushed me to the limit, where it was like, it's taking me hours to light one shot because of the reflective spoon.
What's next?
Well, I'm kind of dabbling into more of the educational space. I've been building this product video course for the past year. It's actually coming out like this month, which I'm really excited about, just because I found there's a lot of product photography, educational information, not as much product video, and certainly not as much product video on social. So I've just been working really hard on that, and got a couple more brand partnerships in the pipeline. But moving to Brooklyn from the suburbs, that's going to be a thing. But yeah, exciting.
That's awesome. So let's open it up to some Q&As if anybody has any questions.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to hear your gear list again.
Yeah, so I use the Sony a7S III is the body I use, and I usually use it with a 50mm 1.4 lens. I would say that's like my main go-to lens. Then I use an Edelkrone slider, which I find Edelkrone, yeah. It's just super helpful. It's the the Pro Long slider, so it has a huge range. You can get some really dynamic shots with it, particularly when you're working in a smaller kind of tabletop environment. I use an e-image tripod, which is amazing, especially for video. It's super fluid movement. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then Godox and aperture lights, but the Godox lights in particular, the small M1 panels, I use those all the time just for little accent lights here and there on my set.
Are they like tabletop? Because it looks like you shoot
yes.
Mostly everything on your table?
Yes, pretty much, yeah. So it's all, these small kind of like panel lights that you can pop inside a box to give it a little bit of a glow, or you can, pop behind one of your props to backlight it. So I find those super helpful.
Oh, great, thanks. And
Yeah.
Any other lenses?
Yeah.
The 50?
Mostly, I mostly use the 50. I actually use the kit lens a lot, the zoom lens, which is the 28-70 for overhead shots. I find that's pretty useful just because the depth of field is not as crucial with the overhead shots. And then the probe lens, which I mentioned a couple times, is just one of those super unique lenses that just gives you a totally different kind of image. It's not necessary by any means, and I made videos for a long time without it, but I've just found that it's allowed me to think outside the box in ways I was never able to before.
And for overhead, does the tripod that you mentioned, it doesn't have an extension for overhead?
No, I actually just use a C-stand for the overhead, for my overhead shots, so I'll just attach my camera to a C-stand, which is probably not, I could probably stand to upgrade that, but yeah.
Yes, since you're mostly stationary. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
absolutely. Hi, Robert.
You convince some of these large companies to take on these kind of very creative and whimsical ideas. There's a lot of, corporate, people that have to approve these things. How do you get them on board?
Yeah.
Great problems.
I've been very fortunate in the sense that I think there's been, in the last couple of years with the growth of TikTok, there's been a little bit of this kind of proof of concept where right at the beginning, brands were really hesitant to get on short form video platforms like TikTok and Instagram. And I think that they've kind of seen the sort of unorthodox ways that people have used these platforms to market products. Even someone like, I don't know if you know Emily Zugay, but she did this whole series where she was making really bad logos for brands. And that was like her shtick. And it's like, you'd think logically this would not be brand safe because it's like you're taking something that we put a lot of pride and effort into, which is our logo, and butchering it. But it gets a lot of eyeballs. So I think that over the years it's just been this kind of proof of concept of these sort of out-of-the-box ways of approaching content, whereas to the point where now brands trust creators a lot more to execute a specific vision. I will say that I do try with all the videos I create to align what I'm doing, at least somewhat with the brand's visual identity. I'm always using their color palette and fonts and their logos, and trying to make something that could stand alone on their page, and if my face was not attached to it, it would still work well for them. But yeah, there's a balance there between, you know, trying to adhere to what the brand is already doing, but then trying to push the boundaries a little bit too for social.
So this is, in a way, following up on the previous question. It's very impressive what you've done.
Thank you.
I mean, the numbers are astonishing, but also there's no real path for doing this. So I wonder, I mean, how do you establish these relationships with these brands? Do you go to LinkedIn and reach out? Or do you have an agency that you work with? Is it reputation based? How does this come about? Do you develop a relationship with them over time where you're helping them become comfortable with your approach? I mean, how does that work?
It's a little bit of everything. I do have management, but I didn't for a very long time. The first 2 years that I was doing this, I was completely doing it all by myself. I have used a little LinkedIn, finessing my way into people's inboxes and trying to figure out who is the right person to contact for this project, because that's huge. It's just like, otherwise you're gonna end up in an inbox with a million other emails. I think I've also found that, you know, the marketing, there's a lot of turnover in the marketing space. So what ends up happening is this one person from this one company that you worked with, who you have a great relationship with, then leaves that company, goes over here, and then they bring that testimonial with them. And it's kind of ends up being a little bit of a small world where everyone's sort of mixing and matching in these different brands, different agencies. So it's really spread over time, I think, through word of mouth and through just, you know, people moving around the industry into different little pockets. But yeah, it definitely at the beginning was a lot more of me just going on LinkedIn, finding the company's page, seeing who's working at that company and what their titles are, and do I think that that's the person I need to get in touch with. Then over time, it's kind of just been more inquiries to me rather than outreach. So, yeah.
I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
I have a question about your creative process, and I wonder if you do any storyboarding.
So I do shot listing. I tried doing storyboarding, but I'm really not very good at it, because when I work with a brand, I will create sort of like a pseudo storyboard where I'm mostly just pulling pictures from Google Images, and I'm saying, like, this is a reference for the perspective, like it's gonna be this upward angle, and this is gonna be the focal length, and that kind of a thing. So I'm pulling a lot of reference images and sort of almost like building little collages for each shot. When I'm not working with a brand and I'm not, you know, being held responsible by anybody, then I just kind of have like a very messy shot list. But it usually all exists in my head, and I'm a very visual person in that I can picture exactly what the video is going to look like when it's finished. It's just a matter of obviously communicating that to the brand and getting the approval. So yeah, it's a lot of Google Images.
I just wanted to know more about your editing process and how, like, what resources you would recommend for learning how to edit videos similar to how you do.
Totally, yeah. So I edit in Premiere Pro. I'm a huge Creative Cloud girl, a little After Effects too. I love pulling, just in terms of like some of the resources that I pull content from, I use Artlist for music, and I love Storyblocks for, you know, stock footage and motion graphics. For editing, I've found it's challenging in the sense that you don't necessarily know what you don't know, and so it's hard to piece together all this information to kind of you know, gather a cohesive like knowledge of the editing software that you're using. But what I kind of found over the years is I sort of worked backwards and reverse engineered a lot of my shots. So I had a vision in my head of like, okay, this is what I want this final shot to look like. What are the tiny little pieces that I have to learn in order to achieve that? And trying to just sort of break it down into finding granular little tutorials on YouTube for like, you know, okay, how do I mask? Okay, I'm gonna figure out how I can mask, then I'm gonna figure out how I can track that mask. And you know, it can be a little bit of a puzzle, but you find that once you've done that enough times, or you've reverse engineered enough shots, then it's like, oh, I actually really know how to do this, and I can use those skills for so much more than just what I originally learned them for. So that's what I found helpful for me, was not necessarily to go through a linear process of like, okay, I'm just gonna learn like how to do Premiere. It was like, okay, no, I'm gonna take it one step at a time. I'm gonna learn, how am I gonna get this shot?
Well, luckily, right after this, we'll have a Premiere guru.
Oh.
So stick around.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I wonder, in your creative process, what do you think it's important to capture in an object in order to sell it or make it look beautiful? Like when you create this video, when you think of the video, what did you think it's important to capture in order to show it to someone?
Yeah, I love that question. Because I have found that I've come to look at objects so differently, like in the way that I see their potential for how could I make a video out of this. I think a big thing that I think about, again, going back to this idea of trying to convey a story arc, is recognizing that there is no such thing as a video without a story, even if that story feels very minute. So something I'm always trying to think about when I'm creating these videos for these objects is, how can I inject some sort of process into this video? So for the egg video, it's like taking the egg, cracking the egg, like letting it fall out into the pan and sizzle. It's this kind of process-driven story of what we do with an egg. With the crumb thing, it was the same thing. It was like I started with a toaster, and the toast pops out of the toaster. I get the butter, and it's not always food, but sometimes it is. And so yeah, I'm always trying to kind of think of the use cases for that thing, and how can I turn that into this epic storyline. I think a big part of the kind of epic nature of it too is very textural shots, close-up macro shots. Again, these are like new perspectives of these objects that we don't normally see. We're not usually taking an egg and like looking at the texture of the shell, right? So super textural, story-driven, and yeah, I think those are kind of the main things that I think about. I also think, again, the music plays a really big role, trying to subvert people's expectations with the music. I try to use some very dramatic, cinematic music tracks because I think that, again, it kind of paints a picture. We think of maybe an egg as, like that cheery thing we get for breakfast in the morning, and I could imagine maybe the prototypical piece of music for that would be something fun and like making our egg for breakfast, but I chose this really dramatic, like epic, piece of music for that piece. So yeah, it's all about kind of just looking at things in the way that we would not normally do so.
Probably related to something you were answering already, but how do you deal with experimentation, the time to experiment and failure? Because sometimes you're not sure if you can pull off an idea, and sometimes it can take a while to perfect it or abandon it.
Yeah. I find that usually when I have an idea and it doesn't quite work out the way that I'd like it to, it always kind of lands somewhere else that sometimes is even better than what I had originally envisioned. And so I think the main thing for me is not being scared to be proven wrong and not being scared to realize, okay, that idea that I had, maybe it wasn't such a good one, maybe it doesn't quite work, but along the way I found this other thing that actually does work really well. I would say I'm obviously going to be a little bit more keen to experiment on the content that I make for myself as opposed to brand content, because at the end of the day I want to make sure that I'm delivering something that's really incredible quality for the brands that I work with. So I'll perfect some of my techniques on my organic videos, and then I'll sort of take those techniques and apply them to the branded videos. But I'm never scared to just try something out, because I usually find I'm going to find, even if it's not what I expected it to be, it's going to be something cool. So.
So I missed a little bit of the beginning of your journey, so forgive me if I'm asking a little bit of something you said already, but how did you go from starting to do all of this to, at this point you have representation even shown on your Instagram bio, so what was sort of that part of the journey where you switched over? Were you approached, or did you realize, oh my gosh, I need help fielding these, and somehow you got help? Mm-hmm. How did that transition to representation look?
It was very slow and very gradual. I was approached, honestly, pretty much from day one once my videos started performing well, but I was very picky about who was going to represent me, because at the end of the day, I don't have a ton of bandwidth for these projects. Like I take a lot more time with my videos than a lot of other social creators do. So I think that I didn't want to have someone who was just kind of seeing me as like a content machine that was just going to turn out X amount of videos a month. And that's why it took me, like 2 years to find someone that I really jived with. So I think it was just a matter of finding someone who kind of aligned with my vision and understood that for me, the output and the quality of the output is super important. I'm not just going to half-ass something just because they have a deadline. But I was very fortunate to find that, and I think it's really helped me gain a little bit of legitimacy among brands, because I think I don't necessarily agree that this is true, but I think a lot of brands have the perception that a creator is not worth working with unless they have management. The management kind of legitimizes the creator, which again, I don't think that should be the case, but I think unfortunately it is a lot of the time. So it's just helped me get into the room with a couple of brands that maybe wouldn't have reached out to me otherwise.
Hey Grace, I'm Cam. So I did come in a little bit later. So again, apologies if you already covered this point. But we live in a world where, of course, you have to have a good hook point in your videos. Like you have to really get people to pay attention in those first 3 seconds. So like all the content you've experienced with, what would you say have been like the best hook points you put on your videos? Whether it's just captions or like you said, with cracking the egg and then letting people hear the sound of the sizzle. Like what's worked best for you?
Yeah. It's always evolving, and I found like a big part of being a content creator is evolving your hook, because the hooks become overused and they lose their stickiness. So originally, when I first started out, my hook was, this is what I'm gonna do in this video. I'm gonna make an epic commercial for a random object. And that was enough to kind of just upfront say, this is what you should expect from this video. Over time, that no longer worked anymore, so I moved into what I do now is I like to read the audience comment that I'm sort of inspired by out loud at the start of my video. So I always start my videos with reading an audience comment that says, I would buy a spoon from you. Why would you buy a spoon from me? So I sort of try to play into the conversation with the audience member who suggested that particular video concept. I also do I've incorporated a lot of ASMR into my videos now, just because I found that even though that's a totally different genre, I'm not an ASMR creator, it's good to sort of incorporate these sort of trending formats into my content, because it kind of, again, has that sort of sticky nature to it. So I think a big part of it is trying to find trends like that, like the ASMR or like the reading the comments, where it's not something that's going to phase out in a couple of weeks. It's not like this one trending audio. It's something that's more of a genre that's going to stick around for a bit longer. So yeah, unfortunately, it's ever changing, and it's one of those things you have to always be on your toes looking out for new ideas.
Hi.
Hi.
My question for you is, where do you see yourself going from here, like 5 years from now? Where do you see your career, your content, and your channel?
I think the biggest pain point for me right now, if you will, is that the work I do is pretty isolating. I'm basically by myself, and that's like my brand at this point. It's like I'm by myself in a studio alone making this video. I would love to be able to create an environment where I have, maybe a couple of people working with me, and we have this creative production studio, and we're creating all this fun tabletop content for these different brands. I would love to build it out in that way. So maybe it's just starting small with a couple of people in a little studio space, but that's kind of where I see me going in the future, is staying in this lane, in this tabletop lane, because I really do love this world, and I have tried out other things. For a long time I was like, oh, I'm gonna direct feature films. No, not my thing. I think that that's kind of like a journey that a lot of people go down and then realize isn't for them. So I love commercial, I love tabletop. I think it's just a matter of trying to make it something that I really look forward to going to every day from a social perspective as well, because right now it's just like I'm by myself all the time. So yeah, I think that's like kind of where I see the future of this going.
Hey, I was just wondering if you could speak about how your studio space and setup has evolved over time. Like, is it in your house? Like, where, like, just all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I first started in my college dorm room, in my bedroom. So I was like building and tearing down my set every single day because I did not have any space for anything. Over time, I moved home after college. I did it in my sister's bedroom for a little while because she was away in college. And then I finally did get a small studio space across the street. So that's where I am right now. But I actually don't need a lot of space to do what I do. And I think that's the beauty of it. And I think it's the reason why, it's one of those things there's a low threshold of entry, I guess, because all you really need is a table and a couple of lights, maybe a backdrop, and you're good to go. So I'm kind of like a goldfish. I kind of expand to the space that I'm in, and I work in I think it's like 400 square foot room. That's my vibe. That's it.
Can you talk about some of the tricks that you've done? I'm watching the videos, the stock footage, or your footage, sorry, and I'm just wondering how you did the milk disappearing.
So the milk disappearing was practical. I actually drilled a hole into the glass and put a little tube in there. And so I just kind of drained the milk out of the glass, and the tube was hidden behind the glass so you couldn't see it. The spinning keyboard, that was done a little bit in post, a little bit practical. I basically, I attached I use wooden skewers for some reason in every single video I create. They're very handy. I attached a little wooden skewer to each side of the keyboard and kind of stood it up and just spun it with my finger, so it was just kind of spinning like this, and then I removed the skewers in post. So I use a lot of kind of household items for the effects that I create. It's a lot of I sometimes use like a fidget spinner as a turntable, and I use lots of like alien tape, white tack, wooden skewers, and just remove them in post a lot of the time.
I have a question. Do you find yourself that you're becoming like an engineer and you are learning new things, and who helps you sometimes on your shoots?
I mean, every once in a while, like my dad will kind of rock up and like, he'd be like, this is how you use grout. But a lot of it has been just figuring out what I need to in order to get the result that I'd like. And a lot of the times too, the sets that I build, they don't have to be pretty close up. They just have to be pretty from a distance. So sometimes they're a little shoddy, they're a little kind of like stapled together or whatever it is. But I just make it work for the purpose it needs to work for, and that's good enough for me.
And then one final question. What's some advice that you would give somebody who is your seat 3 years ago?
I would say don't overthink whatever it is that you're making. I think we get really caught up in either having a perfectionistic attitude or having a certain idea of where we want to be and the path that's going to get us there. And I think that often, and actually always, it ends up evolving. You will never see a content creator who you look at their first video and then you look at their video now and they look the same. It does not happen, because you just have to go through that trial and error process in order to figure out who you are as a creator, what your style is going to be, what your voice is going to be, and what you're going to contribute and what your value is going to add to the platform. So I think just accepting that no matter what it is, your ideas and your vision is going to evolve and it's going to change, and being okay with that, because I think that's a really big hurdle for a lot of people, is feeling like if I can't do it this one way, then I'm not going to do it at all. So, yeah.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. Grace will be outside. And there will be a table out front for a meet and greet, and so you can catch her there. And thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.